here I stand in front of the major palace here in Seoul. This is the center of Seoul in a very busy commercial district, and we can see that it is founded by Confucianism. Now, this thought process is, well, it came from China, right? As you can see, I'm dressed in a traditional Confucianist clothes, and it goes all the way back to the 800s. And now, much like China, Korean society is one of hierarchy. Take, for example, the emperor. This, after all, is his entire estate. And as you can see, it would have towered over everyone else, with the height being a clear sign of his power over everyone. Now, by placing him as the head of the nation, placing himself as the head of the nation, and also to some extent the entire family of Korea, the emperor is able to find social cohesion. And the way he does this is through, well, Confucianism, and specifically the argued need for every single person to become a virtuous man. And now this means following some specific rules, mainly in terms of moral virtues and codes of conduct. Now, looking at the very first moral virtue, we have ren. And ren, meaning compassion, empathy, is the basis to all Confucianist thoughts about how we treat each other. Right? You cannot have a normal interaction with people without feeling ren, without acting in a way that fulfills empathy and compassion. And how else do people interact, right? We have li, which is the code of conduct, and to a further extent, filial piety, or here in Seoul, we call it hyo. Now, there's a certain way to act in the relationships between individuals, right? From ruler to subject, from father to son, from husband to wife, from elder to younger, and from friend to friend. There's always a very clear hierarchy, and more importantly, a clear expectation from each role to the other. Now, all of this places social responsibilities, duties, and harmony above individual needs. And looking at how this palace stands at the center of Seoul, where the buildings are marked in height again to show this inherent hierarchy, it's clear that Confucianism has had a large impact. Yet, even as the philosophy aims for social harmony, it has actually led to more individual moral thought processes. See, in a hierarchy, people want to move up. People don't want to keep being the younger. They don't want to keep being the lower, the subject. They want to become the ruler. They want to have people look up to them, to listen to them. And furthermore, in this situation of hierarchy, there's not really a lot of fairness and equality and social change because obedience is expected from every single person. Now, what I feel like is the most important issue with Confucianism, as well as how it rules a country, is that it doesn't make a person virtuous to follow these rules. It simply makes them act in a virtuous way. So a person can still very much disagree with everything, but simply act this way because they don't want to have social repercussions. Therefore, all of this relational ethics, all of the expectations we have with each other actually forces people to be more selfish, to be more ingrained in their own success rather than that of societies. And nowhere is it more apparent than all the corporations here that we see in Seoul.
So here in this company is the rush hour, currently 6:19. So people are going back home from work. So we could see people coming out from the building in an orderly manner. So the ideal form of work, right, in the Asian context, especially in South Korea, would be respecting hierarchy and following the guidance of team leaders or bosses. As Confucius mentioned in Analyte 3.19, if the Lord directs his minister with li, the minister will serve his Lord with loyalty. So this was something back in the past. In the modern company's context, the employees mirror this dynamic. They're like ministers who execute or implement the boss's ideas with a sense of loyalty, each playing their unique role in the work community aimed to maximize the greatest outcome. And on the other hand, as they exit the building, the idea of social harmony is reflected in the orderliness and not disturbing each other. Most of them managing their own business or finding their own way home. Some of them might be grouped together, but mostly on their own. As mentioned by Confucius, in the practice of li, right, harmony is the key. The form of li or ritual in this society is expressed in the idea to maintain personal space and avoid disruption, allowing each person to move at their very own pace. So there's an element of individualism, and harmony is practiced not through control but through mutual respect, a quiet consensus of personal boundaries all unfolding within the world.
Now, when we look at the subway system here, it seems to be following li, right? You got all the people walking orderly on one side of the road and the other on the other side, and then you have me being a rebel. But you see, this is following the rules of li. This is following the rules of engagement, how people are supposed to act with each other. However, You'll also find that when we get to the actual subway station, there are people pushing in and pushing out. There are people still being very orderly in their routes of going back and forth. However, they're doing so in a way that only seeks to truly support themselves, right? In these cases, yes, they'll still let people come off first. Yes, they'll still be orderly and go on and let the elderly go. But they wouldn't offer help to each other. They wouldn't offer help on a peer-to-peer level. Therefore, you see the social hierarchy as something that actually restricts people rather than letting them truly care for each other in a carefree way. Now, this type of kind of following of the lead can actually foster resentment because, once again, in this hierarchy, you're not supposed to talk to other people. You're not supposed to show your emotions, right? It's supposed to be a very clear system that you're following. Now, what actually happens is people start to care more about their own social statuses, about how they are perceived instead of what actually who they are, right? Instead of the virtuous person they should be, they only care about who they're seen to be.
After taking the subway and finishing work, people often don't finish the day and go eating out with their bosses and other people from the workplace. This is connected to Confucian ideals of filiality, where your bosses are seen as your elders, and it's often quite an obligation, even not formally, but expected to at least go a few times a week. This is also connected to Confucian ideals of nurturing love and respect through actions, such as bosses giving and buying food for their employees and even drinks. But while drinking itself is seen as bad in Confucianism, in Korea it's symbolistic of shared company culture and played out as care. However, in reality, in many situations, it ends up more as another manifestation of power dynamics, both in a sense that it will not allow the people to get the proper rest they need after work, and unfortunately also in some situations as excuse for harassment, especially for women. It could be also argued as a rejecting guidance of wealth, because company is supposed to be seen more as a family, but can that really translate into reality? We can better examine this through Buddhism, where there are ideals about compassion that could, in theory, apply very well for dinners where you see other people as interconnected, but have some important issues that we still need to consider. For example, the reactive attitudes, both in sense of gratitude and potentially even resentment towards your boss, which often come along with the situations, are something that Buddhists would strongly criticize and would recommend you to go away from. They see Confucianism as too egocentric, illustrating how it leads to people rather doing it to try to better their own position in a company, not out of genuine care for each other. However, going to eat can still be a way to culminate care if you do it mindfully and recognize how your daily lives are affected by the other people around you and how they also have their own issues and deep, complex, interconnected things that you can help them take care of. And also sharing others' joy as your own, potentially overcoming some alienation that can come with your regular day-to-day life in a company without seeing others as people and just going away from using them as means to an end. Also, ideally, it wouldn't be tied to alcohol. However, going beyond just going out with your bosses, as it can sometimes also turn into going to another bar or even club later and just now focusing away from company culture and how it further manifests as a part of their daily life. Drinking can make it easier to show compassion to other people, as Koreans have fairly strict social rules and don't as much interact with other people they don't personally know in their lives. However, while they have had enough alcohol, they're more likely to come up to random people, get to know their stories, share compassion, which can be seen as part of sympathetic joy in Buddhism, of genuinely celebrating what other people are doing nicely. And then once you have already interacted while being drunk, they can sometimes, for example, give you your number, and then you can keep having those connections and compassion past that in real life, recognizing the public spaces and interconnectedness. Besides working and having to transport themselves, Koreans also really like to spend time in nature. For example, one of the tour guides told me that the things Koreans love the most are hiking and drinking. And well, now we're going to talk about hiking. There are a lot of beautiful places near Seoul. This is less than an hour away from the city, and look how nice the nature is. For Buddhism, an important part is meditation, and where else can you do it better than in the nature? Even if you're not intentionally trying to just close your eyes and see to yourself, being in the nature allows you to be more present and also see the impermanence of things better. For example, here we see some cherry blossoms that are almost going away. They only bloom for like 10 days a year, but the impermanence of it makes you appreciate it better. And being in the nature can overall help you see the impermanence of everything better. And then by reflecting on it, you will also get to know about the impermanence of yourself, or even the lack of a self, which you can better actually see when you go to Buddhist temples and their teachings. For example, we're going near one right now, as you can see by the lanterns nearby.
Basically, here is a temple place that we visited, like a typical Buddhism place in South Korea. The first thing that struck me here was how vivid everything looks, right? You see the bright lanterns on my right-hand side, and later in colors. It's kind of like a celebration and something like a festival, right? But walking through the gate and into the temple grounds, right, as you see on the left side of the temples here and there, I kind of like feel a little bit sense of like slight contradiction beneath the surface. In a place so deeply tied to Buddhism, right, a tradition centered around detachment and simplicity, or more specifically, no self, which I'll elaborate later on, the presence of all these like external decorations felt both beautiful, of course, but kind of at odds with what Buddhism was teaching. So it reminded me of the Buddhism idea of letting go, not just of material possessions, but of desires, expectations, and even the self. Basically, as we learn in AH144 about the theory of no self, right? It is a way of being that encourages us to move beyond the illusion that we are fixated on, separate individual in pursuit of something permanent. When we cling to, for example, things like identity or success or even like relationships, right? As long as we kind of cling on something, there comes the suffering. So, and yet here in the temple, people often come here to pray for things like love, health, give birth to a new child, or even peace of mind. This, of course, doesn't feel wrong, like all those prayers, right? It feels like it's deeply human, it's like earthly desires, nothing wrong with them. But Buddhism offers a different path. One where the goal isn't to fulfill every desire, but to understand where desires come from and how it binds us. It's not just these prayers are meaningless, they are part of life, but they point to the tension between living in the world and trying to be free from it. What's interesting is how this space captures this duality, right? The bright lanterns and ceremonial structures give forms to people's hopes, but the quiet moments, like I walk down the road and as you walk down the road or hearing nothing but footsteps or raindrops on the stone, are where the deeper ideas land. In Buddhism, suffering isn't a punishment, it's the natural result of craving, or we call it casual connectedness. And that is just about wanting more. It's about needing something outside ourselves to feel whole. Standing there, I kind of feel how Buddhism shifts our relationship to time too. Instead of chasing for a future, everything will finally be right. For example, I'm going to get some position or I want something. It calls us to be just here, to notice how our thoughts arise and fade, how feelings pass and go, and how moments are enough. So that's, I guess, what temples like in Buddhism is offering in realistically, like not answers, not blessings, but a pause. This pause may be a glimpse of what it means to let go, and even something that what I normally do is like meditation in nature, that you feel the very present moment of nature and feels the surrounding.